Hi, it's Steph, and we're at Lowe's, and they're fully stocked with new perennials, trees, shrubs, and colorful annuals. So let's go ahead and take a look at the June inventory at Lowe's. Check out this beautiful variety of Speedwell, also known as Veronica. It's a Monrovia one called Mauve Moody Blues Speedwell, and I absolutely love these vertical spike type perennials because they provide such a beautiful contrast against other blooms in the perennial border. So you can see it right on the side of these lilies, the Asiatic lilies. Just that contrast in color and in shape makes a really interesting border. So this variety of Speedwell, the Mauve Moody Blues by Monrovia, is a full sun perennial. These are $10.98 for the Monrovia containers of perennials, and they like a semi-moist soil. They want 6+ hours of direct sun per day, and they get to be 12 to 14 inches in height, 12 to 14 inches in width, and they bloom summer and fall. And if you deadhead these after the first flush, you can typically get a second flush out of them, but a really pretty perennial. In the past, I've shown a variety of Salvia called Rose Marvel, and some of you have told me how wonderful it is. Well, look at this variety I just came across. It's called Blue Marvel Salvia by Monrovia. It likes full sun, and how large does it get? 10 to 12 inches in height, 10 to 12 inches in width. It blooms spring and summer, and it's hardy down to negative 20 degrees Fahrenheit. It blooms spring and summer, and it's hardy down to negative 20 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, the reason that was cited for the Rose Marvel being such an excellent variety was because it was such a long blooming variety that it went on and on. You could deadhead it, and it would keep pushing out new blooms. And so I'm guessing that this Blue Marvel is a similar variety. It has a really pretty, vibrant purple coloration. And phlox, a must-have perennial for anyone who has a sunny garden. But they actually even have woodland phloxes that can work in a shadier garden. But this is a really pretty variety that I'm thinking I'm going to eventually pick up to replace the fashionably early crystal that I have in my garden, because that variety tends to get pretty bad powdery mildew despite giving it ample spacing. But this one has been known to be great, the Opening Act Pinkadot. It is a garden phlox. It likes full sun, and it gets to be 22 to 26 inches in height and needs 30 to 36 inch spacing. Hardy in zones 4 through 8 or down to negative 30 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, phlox, you really should pay attention to the spacing requirements because of the powdery mildew. Some varieties are more susceptible to it. Some of these newer varieties by proven winners have been bred to be more resistant to powdery mildew. And when you see spacing on plant tags, that usually means center to center. So if you're planting in a perennial border, the center of this perennial to the center of that perennial, you would space to whatever the spacing requirement is. For example, a minimum of 30 inches or 36 inches on center. The coloration on this Opening Act Pinkadot phlox is beautiful. It's multidimensional. You can see it has that lighter pink on the outside with a darker pink in the center. And then there's another variety here called the Opening Act Blush, which is more of a straight pink. The Opening Act Blush variety also wants full sun, and this one is a little more compact at 18 to 20 inches in height and 18 to 20 inch width. Hardy in zones 4 through 8 or down to negative 30 degrees Fahrenheit, and blooms early summer through late summer. And some beautiful varieties of Baptisia or false indigo. Now, typically you see this in the traditional purple blooms, but there are some really pretty options. This one here is the Decadence Deluxe Pink Lemonade, and it's a yellow with a really pretty kind of mauve-y purple pink color. I actually have this one in my garden. You can see a little bit more on this bloom here. It's a very pretty one. And then there's also this one here that's called the Decadence Sparkling Sapphires, which has a deeper shade of purple. Look at that. Gorgeous. What I love about Baptisia is that it's a perennial that actually acts like a shrub. It gets just as large as a shrub at about 3 to 3.5 feet tall and wide. So you really only need one of them, where with other perennials you normally pick up 3 to 5 to make a drift of them, right? And it also has really beautiful foliage. So while I don't find the blooms to last a really long time, maybe up to a couple of weeks, the foliage is really pretty. So it acts as a great kind of filler, even if you want to cut some of these leaves for flower arrangements. I think it works really well. It has a little bit of a blue tint to it. So really interesting and pretty perennial. Here's the information on the Decadence Sparkling Sapphires. It likes full sun, $15.98 for this 1 gallon container by proven winners. And this variety gets to be 30 to 36 inches in height, needs 30 to 36 inch spacing, and it's hardy in zones 4 through 9 or down to negative 30 degrees Fahrenheit. Blooms late spring through early summer. And the Decadence Deluxe Pink Lemonade, which is the variety that I have in my garden as well. This one is the same price, likes full sun, and gets a little bit taller at 42 to 48 inches in height and needs 48-inch spacing. Hardy in zones 4 through 9 or down to negative 30 degrees Fahrenheit. Mine is currently in bloom in my garden in my zone 6B7A, so that checks out late spring through early summer. And this gorgeous light pink salvia caught my eye as soon as I came down this aisle. It is stunning. Look how pretty that is. Now, we've talked about the Rose Marvel Salvia, which is a deeper rose shade. This one is a very light kind of baby pink. Very pretty. And this is the Proven Winners Color Spire's Pink Dawn Salvia. It is hardy in zones 3 through 8. And in general, salvias are very hardy. Most of them are hardy down to zone 3. They're also deer and rabbit resistant. They don't like the fragrance of them, so they stay away from them. And not much bothers them. They're not really bothered by pests. And they get to be this variety 16 to 20 inches in height and need 16 to 20 inch spacing, making it great for the front of a border. And if you deadhead the salvia, so once it starts to mostly fade, all the blooms are kind of gone, take that stem, cut it down to the base of the plant, leave only about 2 to 3 inches of foliage, and it will reflush out with a secondary flush of blooms, which is excellent. And a new rose to hit the garden centers this year, the Proven Winners Rise Up Lilac Days. This one has been highly praised. Everyone seems to love it. It has a beautiful kind of lavender pink bloom, and it's a climbing rose. So this one here gets to be 5 to 8 feet tall, 2 to 4 feet wide, and it is hardy in USDA growing zones 4 through 9. So most roses do like a well-draining soil and a good amount of sun. So this one wants 6+ hours of sun per day. And look at that beautiful lilac color. It is so pretty. Very pretty. It has kind of an open center with the yellow pollen for the bees. And these are in what looks to be a 2-gallon container for $34.98. These roses have such healthy foliage. They're just starting to form buds. So if you took this home, it would likely bloom for you in your garden in the next month or so. And of course, since we're in June, the roses are starting to bloom. And this is a really pretty pale yellow one. Caught my eye. I had to come over here and take a look. It's by True Bloom Roses. And this one is called True Friendship. Look at that. It's a landscape rose. It says easy care, disease resistant, heat tolerant, and continuous blooming. And it wants full sun, 3-foot spacing, and it's hardy down to negative 10 degrees Fahrenheit. And it looks like it gets to be about 3 feet in height. And that is the thing with roses. You have to make sure that they're disease resistant and heat tolerant. If you live in an area with high humidity, we're here in the Northeast, but our summers can be pretty humid. And roses, if they don't have proper spacing and airflow and a well-draining soil, they can sometimes suffer from yellow leaves, black spot, which can be a bit difficult to keep roses if they keep giving you issues, right? I personally don't have the best track record with roses, but I love them. And this one is really fragrant, in case you're wondering, because we want roses to smell nice, right? And these True Bloom containers are, it looks like a 2-gallon for $29.98. This True Friendship rose starts off more of a true buttery yellow, and then as it fades, it goes more into this ivory color with a hint of yellow, which is really pretty. And peonies, mine in my garden are just getting ready to crack bud. The ants are all over them, and that is your sign that they're about to bloom. Now, some people get worried when they see ants on their peony buds, and that's perfectly normal. They're just there to snack on the nectar that's coming out on that bud. But this is a beautiful variety. It's one of my favorites in my garden. It's the Sarah Bernhardt. It has this gorgeous light pink coloration, but it is so fragrant. Not all peonies are fragrant. From the ones that I've smelled, only a handful of them are, but this Sarah Bernhardt is. And it is all bloomed out, which means these are probably going to hit the clearance rack in the next couple of weeks. So if you're looking for peonies, it might be a good time to check that out. The Sarah Bernhardt peony can take part sun and sun. I've actually had it planted in full sun, moved it to a part sun location, and it's done well in both areas. Just note that if you do move a peony, it takes a couple of seasons before it really starts going again with blooms. And this one here gets to be 36 inches in height, 24 to 40 48 inches in width, and it is hardy to a zone 4 or down to negative 20 degrees Fahrenheit. Peonies in general are very hardy plants. This is an herbaceous type peony, which means that you do need to stake it in order for the plant not to flop like you see there. So if you get a lot of wind or rain, because of the weight of these beautiful blooms, the stems tend to flop and they can lay all over the ground. So as soon as you see the stems popping through the soil in very early spring, it's time to put up those supports so that they can grow through them and stay nice and upright. The Ito peonies are a little bit more sturdy. They don't require staking. They're a cross between a tree peony and an herbaceous peony, so they're a lot more sturdy. And the other thing you should know about growing peonies is you don't want to plant them too deep. You want the crown of the plant to be at surface level or just below, because if you bury those eyes too deep, you'll get less blooms. And Asiatic lilies. So there's oriental lilies and Asiatic ones. The Asiatics typically bloom sooner and are shorter, where the oriental lilies will bloom later and they're a bit taller. So these here are Asiatic lilies, and the variety is called Tiny Nugget Asiatic Lily. It's a golden yellow with a little bit of a maroon speckling going on in the center. They like full sun, but they can deal with part sun. $10.98 for this Monrovia container. And they like a semi-moist but well-draining soil. And this variety gets to be 14 to 16 inches in height and 10 to 12 inches in width, hardy down to negative 30 degrees Fahrenheit. There's a couple in bloom here, so you can get an idea of what the coloration looks like and how beautifully it contrasts with that Veronica that we looked at earlier. One thing I will caution you about is that deer do love lily buds. So as soon as they start to plump up like this, they're like deer candy. So they like lily bulbs, day lily bulbs. So you want to go through, make sure that you spray them with a deer and rabbit repellent, and that way they'll stay away from them and you can enjoy your blooms. And some lupin. Now, I purchased some lupin here at Lowe's a couple of weeks ago. It was a coral variety and it was stunning. It's just about done blooming now. I have deadheaded it. I'm hoping it will send up a couple more shoots, but this is a new variety that they have in stock here this week. It's not in bloom yet, but you can see it's sending up bloom stalks now, and my guess it's going to be just as beautiful as the last one. This is a yellow variety and it's called Desert Sun Lupin. This would look gorgeous mixed in with purple perennials, things like Salvias and Speedwells or Veronicas. And this variety gets to be 1 to 3 feet in height, so they're quite tall. This would be middle or back of the border type plant, up to 2 feet wide. They bloom in summer and hardy down to negative 20 degrees Fahrenheit. It is fast growing, and even the foliage on lupin is really beautiful. Look at that. And June is also macrophylla or big leaf hydrangea bloom time. And this variety is a really pretty one by First Editions, and it's unique because it has this dark foliage. So I had been wanting to add one of these to my garden for a couple of seasons, and finally last season, at the end of the season, they went on clearance over at the Home Depot and I picked one up. Well, the thing with these macrophylla type hydrangeas is that sometimes if they bloom on old wood, which this variety does, if you get an exceptionally cold winter, it will zap the bloom buds. So I had quite a bit of dieback on mine this past winter, and it's not looking its best. It's a lot smaller than it was last year. I don't even know if I'll get any blooms off of it, so we'll have to see how it goes. But let me know if you've grown this hydrangea and if you've had any luck with it, because it's absolutely stunning, so I really want it to work out. You can see that it gets these rosy pink blooms against this dark foliage, which is just stunning. So here is the information on the Eclipse hydrangea. You can see it there among a sea of green foliage in the garden. It really stands out. And this one here is hardy in the zone 5 through 9. It gets to be 3 to 5 feet in height, 3 to 5 feet in width, and it prefers a morning sun and afternoon shade. So part shade, part sun. And morning sun is always best for these macrophylla type hydrangeas because it's softer than a harsh afternoon sun, which can cause these leaves to crisp up. So they do like a moderately moist but well draining soil. And the First Editions Eclipse hydrangea is in a 2-gallon container for $29.98. And do you know what the easiest type of rose to grow is? This one here, a Rugosa rose, also known as a beach rose. Now these grow wild along the beaches here in Massachusetts. The hips on these roses are huge. I actually have a friend who collects them and likes to make rose hip jelly. And this variety is by Monrovia. It has a really like bright fuchsia or magenta color, but here is the name of this rose. It's called the Seaside Swirl Red Rugosa Rose. It likes full sun, easy care plant. It's a Monrovia exclusive, $47.98 for this container. It looks like maybe a 2-gallon or so. And it likes full sun. Most roses are going to want full sun. Hardy in zones 3 through 9, so very hardy, down to negative 40 degrees Fahrenheit. And it gets to be 3 to 4 feet tall and wide. Another gorgeous macrophylla or mophead big leaf type hydrangea. They go by several names, and this one here has beautiful purple colored blooms. Now, what determines the coloration of these blooms on the macrophylla type hydrangea is going to be the acidity in your soil. If you have a more acidic soil, they'll lean more blue. If you have a more alkaline soil, they'll be more purple or pink. And this variety here is the Seaside Serenade Cape Cod Hydrangea by Monrovia. $91 for this container. It's a pretty large container, and this variety gets to be 4 feet tall and wide, hardy down to negative 30 degrees Fahrenheit or zones 4 through 9. And Potentilla, which this can actually be classified as a shrub or a perennial, but they get these tiny little flowers that look like little rosettes, and they bloom nonstop all season long. Super easy, low care, low fuss plants. I don't have them, but I visited a garden to do a garden tour where they had a whole drift of them by a swimming pool, and they were really eye-catching. I actually thought they would drift roses. Got a little bit closer, I could tell that they were Potentilla, and I just found an orange variety. So the white one we just looked at is called the Creme Brulee Potentilla, and it is hardy in zones 2 through 6. It gets to be 3 to 3.5 feet in height and 2 to 3 feet in width, and it likes full sun. And these containers here are in a 2-gallon for $27.98. And then there's this variety here, which has an orange coloration to it. And this is the Mandarin Tango Potentilla. And this variety gets to be 2 to 3 feet in height, 2 to 3 feet in width, hardy in zones 2 through 6, and again, wants full sun. And if you garden in sun, but you still want to grow hydrangeas, you can with the Panicle hydrangeas. So the macrophylla type hydrangeas, the serrata, the oak leaves, those typically prefer a shadiest spot. But these Panicle varieties can take more sun. And you want to give them ample water because all hydrangeas like water. Hydrangea, right? Water. But this variety will bloom also later than the macrophylla. So the mophead macrophylla hydrangeas bloom usually in June here in my zone, where these will start blooming closer to July, but they will continually change color. Now these usually go from like a green or cream to shades of pink as we get cooler temperatures at the tail end of summer into fall. They'll continue to change color. Really beautiful. And this one here is the Spring Sizzle Panicle Hydrangea by First Editions. It looks very much like the Proven Winners Firelight hydrangea, and it gets to be 4 to 6 feet in height, 4 to 5 feet in width, and it is hardy in zones 3 through 8. The other great thing about Panicle type hydrangeas is that they bloom on new wood, and what that means is that they will bloom on the stems that emerge this year. So it doesn't matter when you prune them or if your winter is really harsh, they will still provide blooms for you. Typically you want to prune these in late winter or very early spring, just before they start pushing out foliage. And this Spring Sizzle variety also has these really pretty red stems, which provides another layer of interest before the shrub begins to bloom. Spring Sizzle hydrangea is in a 2-gallon container for $29.98. And a Spirea that's in bloom. Now Spirea is an excellent shrub. They are so low maintenance, low fuss, provide a lot of beautiful color in the month of June in the garden. That's when I find most of them bloom, at least here in my area. But let me know when they bloom for you. And this is a bloom that the pollinators absolutely love. And when it's not in bloom, it just provides a lot of texture with its foliage. And this variety is called the Pink Sparkler Birch Leaf Spirea. So you can see that the foliage looks very similar to birch leaf foliage. It gets to be 3 to 4 feet in height, 3 to 4 feet in width. It likes full sun to part shade, and the foliage goes yellow-green to green. Hardy in zones 3 through 7. And the Pink Sparkler Birch Leaf Spirea is $27.98 for a 2-gallon container. And at this point in the spring, most of your azaleas have already bloomed. And if they have, you're probably wishing that you can get a secondary flush out of them. Well, there are now reblooming azaleas. And this is a variety by Proven Winners called the Perfectamundo Double Purple Reblooming Azalea. Now this variety is hardy in zones 6B through 9 or down to -5 degrees Fahrenheit. and it gets to be 2.5 to 3 feet tall and 3 to 4 feet wide. And it wants between 4 to 6 hours of sun per day. And this container looks like a 1.5 gallon for $21.98. With the Perfectamundo double purple reblooming azalea, you'll get that first flush in spring, and then you'll get reblooming in late summer through fall until you get your first hard frost. This one actually has another bud on it right there. See that? And a popular boxwood by proven winners, the Sprinter boxwood. This is great for hedging. They're really fast growing and deer resistant. Typically they're deer resistant after they're established. Sometimes deer will nibble on the tender new growth, but in general boxwood are pretty deer resistant. They're also one of the few evergreens that can take a part shade location, so they do okay in sun and in part shade. So this Sprinter boxwood is hardy in zones 5 through 9 or down to -20 degrees Fahrenheit. They get to be 2 to 4 feet tall and wide, and they want between 4 to 6 hours of sun per day. They're also really great in containers. I have 2 pots that I have flanking my back door on my patio, and the boxwoods that I have planted in there have done wonderful. And I just clip them into little topiary balls once a season after they push out their flush of growth, and they do really well in containers and provide evergreen interest. And then you can underplant them with some seasonal annuals for some color if you wanted to. These are in a 1.5 gallon container for $22.98. In my last video, I had a request for more shade perennials. The thing is, at the garden center, the shade section is typically a lot smaller than all of the sun sections. So we're gonna go ahead and take a look at a couple of perennials. This one here has really pretty foliage. When you're working in a shady corner or a shady garden, it's really important to add color through the use of foliage. And heucheras and hostas are a great way to do that. This happens to be a hybrid. It's a heucherella, and it's the Fun and Games Red Rover, which has a really pretty foliage and coloration. Look at that. It has fantastic foliage, easy to grow. Fun and Games Red Rover is a heucherella hybrid, $12.98 for this 2-quart container. It is hardy in zones 4 through 9 and gets to be 18 to 20 inches wide and 6 to 8 inches high. They do bloom similar to heuchera. They will send up these bloom stalks that look like baby's breath. The pollinators love them. I think they look really ethereal and wispy, kind of floating above the foliage. But if you don't like them, you can follow them down to the base of the plant and cut them off. This is also another really pretty one that I actually planted in my garden a couple of seasons ago, and I planted them under a red Japanese maple because this bright chartreuse green foliage adds a lot of color, but also that red veining pulls on the foliage of the bloodgood Japanese maple, and I think they look really beautiful together. Sometimes here at the garden center, they'll get a little too much sun and get a little crispy, but you can see there's a lot of life left in this plant. So if you take it home, put it in the right light conditions, water it, it'll start pushing out new growth in no time. So $12.98 for this one as well. It's the Fun and Games I Spy heucherella, perennial for part shade to shade, and it blooms late spring through early summer. This one needs 20 to 24 inch spacing, and it gets to be 8 to 10 inches in height, hardy in zones 4 through 9. And Hosta, another great foliage plant that comes in so many different colorways and patterns that will add a bright pop of color to a shady corner of the garden. The things you have to be aware of when growing Hosta is that they're sometimes affected by slugs, so they will poke holes through the leaves, and all you have to do is put down something like Sluggo, which is these pellets that the slugs will eat, and then they'll leave your Hostas alone. And the deer are also really attracted to Hosta. They like to eat the foliage like salad. So if you deal with deer, you would have to spray them with repellents, but even better if you garden in a fenced area. They won't bother them in that case, right? But these are really pretty here. These are a proven winners variety of Hosta, and it's called the Shadowland Hudson Bay, and it can deal with part shade to shade. This variety gets to be 36 to 40 inches in height and needs 60 to 72 inch spacing. Hardy in zones 3 through 9, and they bloom in early summer. So a couple of things to know about Hosta. They come in all different sizes. Some of them can be quite large and some stay more compact. They also are very hardy plants, super hardy. They take really well to dividing, and they're pretty drought tolerant once they're established. Now the blooms on hostas will come up at some point in midsummer. This one's actually starting to get a bloom stalk already. You can see it here. And they're a bell-shaped bloom in shades of purple, light purples and whites. The pollinators absolutely love them, so that's a good reason to leave them up. Some people don't like when they bloom and they'll cut off the bloom stalk at the base and just leave the tuft of foliage. But I think because the pollinators love them, it's a great idea to leave them up for at least a little while. They fade pretty quickly, I would say within a week or so, but lots of different varieties of hosta. You can see here the one we just looked at was the Shadowland Hudson Bay, and then there's this one here by Monrovia, which has kind of a creamy outer margin with more green in the center. It's called the Aereo Marginata Hosta 1098, and this one gets to be, let's see, 24 to 30 inches in height and also upwards of 70 inches in width. And of course, macrophylla hydrangeas, which do excellent in a shady garden. So if you give them any sun, about 4 hours of morning sun is great. They will allow them to have enough sun to bloom, but they won't crisp up their leaves, because this is what happens if they don't have enough water or they get too much sun. You'll start seeing leaves crisp up like this and they don't look as attractive. But these here are by the Endless Summer brand, and what's great about the Endless Summer brand is that they have been bred to bloom on old wood and new wood. And if you're not sure what that means, is old wood means that the stems from last year that tend to harden up, that's where the bloom buds will come out for this year's blooms. And if it blooms on new wood, whatever stems emerge from the soil this year, that is where the buds will form for the blooms this year. So this variety, the Endless Summer, they have both blooms on old wood and new wood. So even if you get a really late spring frost or an exceptionally harsh winter, you don't have to worry about not getting flowers, because you'll still get blooms on that new wood that will emerge in spring. You can see this one is getting all budded up and getting ready to bloom, and some of these already have blooms on them. And there's a couple of varieties here. So there is the bloom stalk, which has a really beautiful red stem. And this variety gets to be 3 to 4 feet in height, 4 to 5 feet in width, and hardy in zones 4 through 9. And it likes morning sun and afternoon shade. It's going to want a moist but well-draining soil. And then they also have the original. Now this is the one that everyone associates with those big, beautiful blue blooms. But remember, the acidity in your soil is what's going to determine the color of those blooms. You can add something like a soil acidifier. Espoma sells a granular one that you can add around the base of your hydrangea, scratch it into the soil, and over time it will gradually change the color. It might take a couple of seasons, but be consistent and then you might see some change. And then this one is hardy in zones 4 through 9, gets to be 3 to 5 feet in height, 3 to 5 feet in width. And this is in it looks like a 1.5 gallon container for $19.98, which is a great price point, but also the smaller size makes them easier to plant. They also have the Summer Crush variety, which you can see is primarily a pink coloration, and this one is pretty compact at only 18 to 36 inches in height and 18 to 36 inches in width. Hardy in zones 4 through 9. So the size on this one makes it really nice because you can tuck it into any size garden, small or large. And the other great thing about these Endless Summer hydrangeas is that they're reblooming. So you'll get that first large flush in June, and then you'll get reblooming throughout the season. Here is the soil acidifier that I was talking about. It's by Espoma. It says it turns hydrangeas blue. It will lower your soil pH, which is what causes the soil to get more acidic. You can also use it on blueberries and for hydrangeas. And this one here, the price tag is missing, but it is somewhere around that $15 price point. And a proven winner's macrophylla type hydrangea. This one is called Let's Dance Lovable, and it also has a rosy pink bloom. And this variety, let's see how large it gets. 3 to 4 feet tall and wide, hardy in zones 5 through 9 or down to -20 degrees Fahrenheit. And this one also has the ability to change into a blue or purple shade depending on the acidity of your soil. So more alkaline, they will be more pink, and more acidic, they will be more blue. And this variety here is in a 2 gallon container for $32.98. Now deer also love hydrangea blooms and buds. So if your hydrangeas are starting to set buds like this and getting ready to bloom, you might want to go ahead and protect them by spraying them with some deer repellent, because this is just about the time where they like to strike, and I don't want you to miss out on those gorgeous blooms. And if you're newer to gardening and you're not sure how to protect your plants from deer and rabbit, this is what you could use. One of these repellent sprays. They're very easy to use. You just shake them up, spray them on your plants, and reapply, especially if it rains really heavily where some of it can wash off. But in general, you can probably do this every 10 to 14 days. I tend to get into a routine of doing it about once a week during the growing season because I have a lot of plants to protect, so I like to keep on top of it. But usually every 10 days or so is sufficient. And this one comes pre-mixed in this large container. You just add the nozzle, spray your plants, and I tend to do it at night and don't do it on a windy day because this stuff stinks terribly, but it does a good job about protecting your plants. And this one here is a granular one, which I also like to use because I feel like it holds up better during a rainstorm. Just shake that on the ground near your plants, and so I have this one there as a backup plan, and then I always spray this one on a regular basis. $24.98 for that large container. You can also buy it online if you wanted to. I've also used this deer stopper before because I actually deal with more deer than bunnies, and it works really well. It has more of a pleasant fragrance, smells like peppermint to me. Good idea to maybe use at least 2 different repellents so that you can alternate between the two, because deer and rabbit are smart, and if you use the same scent all the time, they'll get used to it and it won't bother them as much and they'll start eating your plants. So that's another tip I have. And Sedum, such a rock star perennial. They're really low fuss. They don't need a lot of water. They like a lot of hot sun. So if your soil leans dry, these are excellent plants. Of course, every plant is going to need water when they're first planted until they establish, but after that, they're pretty much on their own and do well all season long. They're also great to provide late summer interest heading into fall, because most of the season when they emerge in spring, they would look like this, but they have a lot of texture, so they still offer a lot of visual interest. And then as you get later in the season, late summer through early fall, they will bloom with these tiny little clusters of pink flowers that the pollinators absolutely love. There's some that also bloom in yellow, so there are different color options. This one here is hardy in zones 3 through 9. That's the other thing. Sedums are super hardy, and this variety grows 20 to 24 inches wide and gets 8 to 10 inches high. It's called the Rock and Round Popstar Sedum by Proven Winners, and these containers are 2 quarts for $12.98. You know, the shape of this reminds me very much of my Sedum Siboldi or the October Daphne, where it has a look similar to something like eucalyptus, which I really like. And Cat's Meow Nepeta. Now I have both the Cat's Pajamas and the Cat's Meow in my garden. The Cat's Pajamas is smaller, more compact, stays 12 to 14 inches tall and wide. And this one here is the next size up. And this variety gets to be 24 to 36 inches wide and 17 to 20 inches high. The Cat's Meow. And it is hardy in zones 3 through 8, so very hardy. Now catmint or nepeta, they go by both names, also has a minty fragrance, which means deer and rabbit stay away from it. I find it quite pleasant, and they bloom for a really long time. Even after you get its initial first spring bloom, if you deadhead it, follow the plant down to the base, leave it at about 3 to 4 inches in height, it will reflush out with a new set of blooms. And it has these really pretty, dainty purple blooms that the pollinators love. Earlier in the spring, you'll see the traditional dicentra or bleeding hearts blooming. And then later in the spring, you get these really pretty varieties of dicentra, which have these fern-like leaves. And the blooms are also different. They're a bit more upright instead of having that cascading or weeping type shape on the stems. But they have a very similar bloom in the sense that it's a heart that opens up with this little droplet at the bottom. And these also bloom for a really long time. I have a friend that I visited her garden last year, and she says that if she continues to deadhead them, they will keep pushing blooms out all season long. Let me know if you grow this variety of dicentra and what your experience is with them. So this is by Proven Winners. It's the Pink Diamonds Dicentra, a perennial for part sun to sun, and it is hardy in zones 3 through 9, and it blooms late spring through early fall. So just the fact that it says late spring through early fall will tell you that it is a continuously reblooming perennial, which is excellent. And another one of my favorite specimen type perennials, and I call them a specimen type because you only need one and it gets as large as a shrub. This is the hardy hibiscus, and this variety is by Proven Winners. It is the Summerific Evening Rose. My mom has this one in her garden, and I have the Perfect Storm. This one has these large rose pink shade blooms and dark foliage, which makes such a beautiful contrast. And the great thing about these is that they bloom in late summer. So in August, for me in my zone 6V 7A garden. They break out into full bloom. They are loaded, such a prolific bloomer, and they're so eye-catching. So this is not something that is very common. Some people don't like that when the blooms are done, they kind of just droop. I have a habit of going through and cleaning them up each night. I think it's relaxing to deadhead plants, so I don't mind doing that, but it's a real pretty one. If you don't have one, I highly recommend it. If you plant it now in June and next season you're worried that it's not coming back, don't worry. It breaks dormancy really late. In my garden, it usually starts breaking through the soil in mid to late May. It's just starting to kind of come up and be 3 to 4 inches tall at this point. So it's a really good one. If you don't have one, add one to your garden. They look great around patios, pools. They have a really tropical vibe to them. So here is the information on the Summerific Evening Rose Hibiscus. They like full sun in order to bloom best. This is a 2-gallon container for $17.98. They get to be 48 inches in height, and they need 54 to 60 inch spacing. Hardy in zones 4 through 9, and they bloom midsummer through early fall. And speaking of plants that like water, willows love water. This is a dappled willow. This variety is called flamingo. But what's great about this shrub is all of the color variation that you get in the foliage. You can see that there is shades of green and cream and even some pink. So this one here is by Monrovia. It's called the Flamingo Dappled Willow. It likes full or part sun, has dramatic foliage, easy care plant, and it is $52.98. And this variety reaches 8 to 10 feet tall and wide, and it is hardy in USDA growing zones 4 through 10 or down to negative 30 degrees Fahrenheit. And by June, you'll start to see plants hitting the clearance rack here at Lowe's. Earlier in the season, they typically have annuals, but as we get into the summer months, you'll find a lot of great perennials, and most of the time they're just fine. It's just because they're out of bloom. So you can see here these Asiatic lilies have hit the clearance rack. They look perfectly healthy, but they're done blooming. So they're not as attractive to customers because they don't have any flowers on them. So they hit the clearance rack. I actually bought my Asiatic lilies, the tiny diamond, here a couple of years ago. They're gorgeous pink lily, and I got them on clearance because they were done blooming. And I've enjoyed them ever since. So here is the clearance structure here at Lowe's. You can see that anything over $15 is going to be 50% off. And then anything less than $15, there are the price ranges right there, so you know how much you would pay. And I can see right here that they have placed some of this Proven Winners Sweet Romance Lavender on clearance. Another giveaway is that there is a black line through the barcode, and at $12.98 these would only be $7. And the soil is still moist, so they're being taken care of. They look relatively healthy, so these would be a great pickup as a perennial for $7 a piece. I actually made a video to give you 5 tips on how to clearance shop and be successful. I will link that video down below if you want to go ahead and check it out. And some beautiful evergreen trees by Monrovia. Evergreens are such an important part of the garden. They provide structure. They become the bones of your garden, really. And especially living in a colder climate, they're so important to have interest in your garden all year round, especially during the winter months when all of our perennials are dormant. So this one here is a dwarf globe blue spruce by Monrovia, $210. And the reason the price point on these are going to be more expensive is because someone had to grow this to the size that it is to then clean out all of that foliage at the bottom to grow it into this standard form. So anytime that you get something in a standard form or topiary, they're generally going to be more expensive. And this one here says that it reaches 6 to 8 feet tall in tree form and 5 to 6 feet wide. Hardy down to negative 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Super hardy blue spruces, zones 2 through 8. The thing you should know about these is if you buy it in this shape, you are going to have to prune it to maintain that shape. And then this one here looks like a type of mugo pine. Yeah, it is a mugo pine. Also really beautiful. And to size control these is when they put their spring kindle growth on, you would just go through, prune those tips, which looks like somebody did here, and that will keep it more compact. And here's also another really interesting variety of Colorado blue spruce. This one is called Sparkler. And what happens with this one is in the spring, all of the new growth tips will emerge with this gorgeous golden yellow color. Look at that. And this one here is $126. Multi-season beauty, wants full sun, and it grows in a pyramidal shape. The average size reaches 10 to 12 feet tall in 10 years and up to 60 feet tall and 20 feet wide with age. Now, I'm really happy that they're starting to put this in 10 years disclosure on the tags, because a lot of times when we bring home plants, if you're just reading the tags, you're going to think that the size that you see is the size that the plant is going to be. But the size that you see is typically a 10-year average. And that's really important to know so that you can plant these, making an educated decision so you don't later have to cut down that tree or have to move and risk killing it if the size outgrows its space, right? And another cool foliage shrub, this is Lowe, and it's a rainbow variety, and you can see that the foliage has some variegation of green and cream with a hint of pink. And this variety is called the Rainbow Drooping Lowe by Monrovia. It likes part sun, has dramatic foliage, multi-season beauty. These are $60.98. And it's hardy in zones 5 through 9 or down to -20 degrees Fahrenheit. And it will slowly reach 3 to 5 feet tall and wide, but can be clipped to 2 feet tall. That's a real pretty one. And here is a grass-like perennial that is excellent for moist soils or even on the edge of a pond. If you have a pond and you're growing water or aquatic plants, this is a great option. It is called sweet flag or a chorus. $9.98 for this ornamental grass. It likes full sun, and what I love about it is, so you can see this one has a variegation of yellow and green. I have it in a bed that stays really moist, and this has performed beautifully for me. And it's also a grass that stays pretty evergreen here in my zone. It will stay a paler shade of yellow throughout the winter and colder months, and then in mid to late spring it will start to color up with this really vibrant yellow and be really beautiful. So it has a great shape, stays relatively compact at about 18 to 24 inches wide and only about 10 to 12 inches high. So really great plant for the front of a border. So here is the information on it. It is hardy to a zone 5 or down to -10 degrees Fahrenheit. This particular variety gets to be about 10 inches high and 18 inches wide, and it is just so low maintenance. $9.98. And if you want to add a pop of silvery brightness to your borders, this is Silver Mound Artemisia. This perennial likes full sun, and it is hardy down to -30 degrees Fahrenheit, and it only gets to be 4 inches in height, 10 inches in width, making it great for the front of a border. And it's $8.98 here in the Lowe's house brand container. And a quintessential cottage garden flower, the Shasta daisy. I love Shasta daisies. They're just a classic bloom, so pretty. They last forever in a vase. If I cut them, I can get a solid 7 days just by changing the water once or twice. I love to put them in my windowsill, in a bud vase. I just love them. So this variety is the Sweet Daisy Birdie. It's an upright perennial that blooms in spring and summer. Now daisies are going to want full sun, and this one is hardy to a zone 5 or -10 degrees Fahrenheit, and it gets to be 6 to 12 inches in height, 8 to 12 inches in width. And I find them to be pretty deer resistant. Nothing seems to bother them, at least in my garden, but I really like that this one has this sweet kind of roughly double layers of blooms going on. And another excellent perennial for the garden is Achillea, also known as yarrow, and this is an excellent variety called Moonshine. It has this silvery gray foliage and then these golden blooms. I actually am interested in adding these to my garden this year because I really like the foliage color. I think it's going to add a beautiful contrast, and the yellow is also really pretty because it has this kind of it's a softer golden yellow. It's not like an orangey yellow, if that makes sense. These also make excellent dried flowers. In fact, in my garden club in town, we dry these to make arrangements for the holidays. We use these as picks inside with evergreen cuttings, and they look gorgeous with some dried orange slices. They just look really pretty and natural. But if you don't have this yarrow in your garden, it's a good one. It does get a little bit tall, which means it could have the tendency to flop, but that is more the case if it's not getting enough sun. If it gets plenty of sun, it will stand more upright. And the Moonshine yarrow, here is the information on it. It likes to be watered, keep moist the first year. After that, they're pretty drought tolerant. They are cold hardy down to -20 degrees Fahrenheit, and this variety gets to be 18 to 24 inches in height, 12 to 15 inches in width, making it a great plant for like the second row of a border, which will also have other perennials around it to help keep it upright. And another excellent plant for a shady garden, Astilbe. Now there aren't a lot of flowers that bloom in the shade, but Astilbe does, and it does it beautifully. I actually just added another variety to my garden last week, a peach one that I purchased over at the Home Depot. But right now, at usually middle of June or so is when they bloom in my garden, mid to late June. And they get these plumes of gorgeous blooms. You can see this one is a little further ahead, and they look like these fuzzy plume blooms. Now they are hungry plants, so in order to get the most blooms out of your astilbe, you definitely want to fertilize them with a granular fertilizer in late winter, early spring. Scratch it into the soil around the base of where your astilbe is starting to emerge, and you'll know that they're coming up and emerging because they have almost like these fern leaves that you will see popping through the soil where they're planted, right? And something like a plant tone by Espoma is what I like to use. And they also like moisture, so a moist but well draining soil. If you give them ample water and fertilizer, they'll bloom beautifully for you, and they're a great way to add blooms and color in a shady garden. This one is beautiful. I can tell by the color it's going to be like a soft pink, and it is by Monrovia, the unique silvery pink astilbe. It's a shade perennial, $10.98 for these, and they are usually very hardy, 20 degrees Fahrenheit, and it gets to be 12 to 16 inches in height, 12 to 16 inches in width, and you can see that for the soil, it likes moist soil. And this other variety is going to be more of a pink shade, you can see here in the bloom, and it is the Monrovia Unique Cerise astilbe, and it's also a shade perennial, $10.98, same price. And this variety, 12 to 16 inches in height, 14 to 18 inches in width, hardy down to negative 30 degrees Fahrenheit, so a little more hardy than that light pink variety. And they are deer resistant, and I can vouch for that because the deer do not touch them in my garden. And a perennial that's excellent for part shade is the Roseanne geranium. This is a classic, and it's a garden workhorse. This is a plant that will bloom non-stop from spring all the way through fall. They make an excellent companion plant for things that maybe only bloom for a little bit of time. You can plant this at the base of those plants so that you continuously have some color. So the Roseanne cranesbill or geranium gets to be 20 inches in height, 24 inches in width. It is hardy down to negative 20 degrees Fahrenheit, and these are in a 1.5 gallon colored container here at Lowe's for $15.98. And these are pretty large. You can probably divide them right out of the container. I do that all of the time when I buy new plants. That way you get double for the same amount of money. And another perennial with some serious flower power is Scabiosa butterfly blue, also known as pincushion flower. Now this is a perennial that blooms non-stop from mid to late spring all the way through fall. It has the most beautiful lavender purple bloom. The pollinators absolutely love it. It has these tall, wiry stems atop the base of the foliage. It's just really pretty, well behaved. And it's what they call a short-lived perennial. What that means is that it'll return beautifully for 2 to 3 seasons, and then 1 year it might not return, where some other perennials will keep going for years and years. But I actually love this so much that I've replaced it in my garden probably twice by now, because it's lasted 2 to 3 years and then it didn't return. I usually buy them to put in my spring containers on the front porch, and then I plant them out in the landscape. But they're a wonderful perennial to have in the garden. Pincushion flower butterfly blue. This one is a mounting perennial. It gets to be 15 inches in height, 15 inches in width, hardy down to negative 20 degrees Fahrenheit, and it says keep moist the first year, then they're pretty drought tolerant after that. They also still have lots of annuals, beautiful colorful annuals in stock, especially in these ready fill containers. These are so easy because you can just take them home, plop them in your container, and you are good to go. They have lots of different options. This one here has these pretty petunias. Look at that, like a golden kind of orangey color. $10.98 for that 3-quart size. And then they have these here that are a little bit larger that are $19.98, and they look like they fit a 12-inch container, and you can see that they have some blue lobelia and some calibrachoa, or the smaller petunia, as well as some regular petunias, and a Dracaena spike in the center. So if you're a person who doesn't really like to choose your own plants to combine for your annual containers, this takes a lot of that guesswork out of it. Some gorgeous caladiums, which also can be used in the shade. They can be used in the ground as well as containers. These are an annual. Some people do lift the corms and save them over for the following year. This variety here is by Proven Winners. It's called the Heart to Heart and Soul, $9.98 for a 2.5-quart container. Really pretty heart-shaped leaf. This one has some green and some cream and some pink with splashes of red. And then there's this one here that's the Heart to Heart and Soul. This one is more of a green margin with red in the center. And look at this adorable annual with this true blue bloom. It is called the Bloom My Mind Evolvus, and it's $5.98 for this quart-sized container. Now, I have never grown Evolvus before, but I've been curious about it, and I have a red penta that I'm trialing in my garden, and I thought that would be pretty to plant this along with it, and maybe something in white for a red, white, and blue 4th of July themed container. So this one here only gets to be 4 to 8 inches in height, it looks like. Let's see. Yeah, it's a mounding, trailing type perennial, and it's short, 4 to 8 inches in height, and needs 8 to 12 inch spacing, and it likes full sun. So we're gonna give that a shot. Well, that brings us to the end of the beginning of June inventory here at Lowe's. I hope that you've enjoyed checking out what my store has in stock, and I hope that you can find some of these varieties near you. Thank you so much for spending your time with me, and I'll catch you in the next one.